everyone. I'm Samira the host of the podcast, The Patient from Hell. I have a very, very special guest with me today. I have my own doctor, Dr. Siegel, joining us. Hi, Dr. Siegel.
Hi. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Different setting, slightly.
Yeah.
No white coat.
No
but-
white coat. Rasta hat. So cold.
Oh, I know. Our
Anybody have
HVAC
to do a temperature regulation and survivorship? Whoop whoop.
I literally just our HVAC broke, and I was telling our neighbor that my body doesn't control temperatures anymore. It's just not a thing.
Yeah.
It does not
I
exist.
hear that a lot, and I feel that for sure. Drives my husband crazy because body needs to be warm and face needs to be cold. So I'm bundled up like a little polar bear, and then I have a fan on my face at night. And he's like, "You just require too much to go to sleep."
That's a pretty good hack.
Yeah.
Huh, maybe I should try that.
Different temperature zones for the body for sure. Yeah.
Huh. I never thought of that. I think I need to try that.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I have homework. Dr. Siegel, let's start with, if you're open to it, the personal side of it.
Sure.
So you tend to wear two hats, both literally and metaphorically. Maybe you can just tell us kind of how you ended up in the practice you ended up with, and why you have figured out that you may need a fan for your face and a blanket for your body.
Right. That's a good lead in. Well, I would say I have three hats actually. I'm a medical doctor. I'm an internist. I started off as a hospitalist out of residency, and then I went into primary care. But even before I practiced as a hospitalist, I would say I was a care partner or a caregiver for my husband. My husband's also a doctor, also named Sam, and he is a cancer survivor as well. He had testicular cancer while we were in medical school, and he had autoimmune liver disease, requiring a liver transplant right after residency. So we were navigating serious illness and living young adult life through that, all through medical training, having a family throughout that, ultimately having his transplant, and then I went straight into hospitalist and primary care, and was practicing for a little while, and then after I was practicing for a couple of years, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma, and it was relapsed refractory Hodgkin lymphoma. So typically, that's what everybody told me. It's the good cancer. It's winning the cancer lottery, which there's no good cancer. They're all hard in different ways. So just start off with that. But typically, Hodgkin lymphoma is very curable, and 90% cure rate was my estimated prognosis initially up front. And within a month of finishing treatment the first time, I developed symptoms of a relapse or recurrence. So after having a completely clean PET scan, no evidence of disease, at the end of 6 months of grueling multi-drug chemotherapy regimen, I began having a similar cough and lump in my neck, just symptoms that were eerily reminiscent of the initial diagnostic symptoms. And the second time around, I was like, uh-oh, you know? And so then I went through even more really intensive treatment. I had salvage therapy leading to a stem cell transplant, which is sort of like what's called an auto BMT, and where a person is their own donor. And then I had an entire year of post-transplant consolidation, like targeted chemotherapy. So 2.5 years of treatment, and learned a lot. And actually, on the topic of today's discussion, had a near-death experience during my stem cell transplant, or what I felt was a near-death experience during my really low cell count days where I was waiting for engraftment. waiting for my stem cells to take hold and build new bloodlines. I felt extremely low. I felt like unattached to my body for a couple days. Like I was just floating up here, bodies down here. Felt really close to the end of this physical life, moving out of physical being. And it just kind of changed me forever. I would say I could talk a lot about what it felt like to be in that liminal space. But I would also say that just once I kind of came out of that, it took a while to get the words for it, but I just realized if I'm ever going back to medicine at all, I'm going back to do something with this. And I've been on this quest ever since then. I was transplanted in 2023 in June. And then I began just like the relentless pursuit to build an onco-primary healthcare model. And that's what I do now. So I am an onco-pcp, which means that I do longitudinal care for cancer survivorship, starting from the time of diagnosis. So I can see somebody right after they're diagnosed, and it doesn't matter if they've reached the end of active treatment. It doesn't matter if they're stage 4 when they get diagnosed. And I also sometimes see people who are done with active treatment and what we consider more traditional survivorship care. So one of my agendas since all this happened and I began to lobby for an onco-primary practice is this realization that National Cancer Institute defines cancer survivorship as anybody living after a cancer diagnosis through the balance of life. So from the time point that you're diagnosed for the rest of your life, you're a cancer survivor. Even if you don't like that word, the word survivorship kind of pertains to that. And it's this field of supportive care during cancer treatment, recovery and rehabilitation at the end of active treatment, if you have an end of active treatment. And it's monitoring for relapses, recurrences, long-term and late effects. And it also includes people who are metavivors, so people who are diagnosed at stage 4, living with active metastatic disease and yet living very full lives still, many still working. And so my agenda has been to create a primary care model that is in alignment with how National Cancer Institute defines survivorship, and to sort of spread that. So sure, it's about growing my own panel of patients, but even more so, it's about teaching other clinicians and growing and spreading this model so that it can have a very large impact.
Dr. Siegel, I didn't realize that your own treatment was as recent as June of 2023.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Actually, wait, was it? Now I'm forgetting my translate. I think it was June 2022. Yeah, I was diagnosed in 2021, transplanted in 2022. See,
Wow.
chemo brain. I'm gonna call chemo brain on that one.
Oh, no, it's real. It's
It's real.
real. Yeah.
It's real. Yeah, I think this year will be the third birthday.
Wow.
Yeah, but still, I mean, I finished the consolidation treatment in June 2023. So yeah, it's recent. It's recent, and sometimes it's still pretty raw. You know, we were just talking right before we hopped on the call about healing being nonlinear and ongoing, and I really feel that. You know, some days I feel really healed and well, and sometimes, you know, whether it's something I experience through caring for patients or someone in my family, or even just societally, like something just triggers, activates me and sets me back, you know, and I'm like, wow, this pain is still fresh, you know, and then I try to heal it again in a different way, I guess.
I I don't often go into a loss of words on this podcast for what it's worth, but that has to be hard.
Oh yeah, it is. I will say that when I got diagnosed, it was like after years of shepherding my husband and my family through serious illness, and I was the rock. I was the one who was just always healthy, marathon runner, carrying a lot physically, emotionally. Sometimes I was the only one working in our family when he was recovering from transplant. So things were finally like calming down for us. And so when I got diagnosed, it felt like the gut punch of a lifetime. Like, really? I mean, one of my first thoughts was, oh my God, we've been so preoccupied about his mortality, our whole relationship, and I'm gonna be the one to die here. you know? It was just incomprehensible originally. I mean, it was so hard. It was so hard.
How's your husband now?
He's doing well. He's doing well. I think it was really hard for him too. I think he got to a point where he felt comfortable being the patient. Like, we had our routine. He was um, always wanted to be like the very jovial, affable patient, and I was kind of the worried wife or the worried spouse. And then I think when he flipped into being the caregiver, that was hard for him, especially because he went directly into doing mode. He's like, I'm gonna take care of the kids and I'm gonna cook the meals and I'm gonna do all this stuff, which totally appreciated. And yet there were times when I just wanted him to sit there with me and process, like, holy shit. Could this really be happening? And just kind of like grieve with me. And that was harder for him. He could do the things, he could show up for me um and be a rock, but I think the like vulnerability aspect of processing how difficult it was for us emotionally, him watching me physically change a lot during my treatment, that was very hard for him, and that took us a while to kind of move through. Yeah, but we're good. We're good. We're good now. I would say our house is really open. I would not have wished this upon ourselves or our family or our kids, but I think that one, outcome of this has been, like, one silver lining in this has been that our family's really resilient. Like, our kids are really funny and deep and understand a lot about death and dying, mortality, vitality. These are words that are really commonly dropped in our house. And not by choice, but because I felt that, especially going into transplant, they asked me, like, Mom, could you die? And so I felt that I had to be honest with them, in like an age appropriate way. So I would say, yeah, I could, but I'm going to try really hard not to, you know? Um, but yeah, so these have been ongoing conversations in our family, and now they're conversations that I try to bring into my medical practice. So when I have an intake visit with somebody in my onco-pcp practice, I ask almost every single person about, do you have an advance directive? And even if they say yes, they do, I ask them, like, what is that? What does that mean? And can you tell me more about that? One, for like a practical reason, because I find that sometimes people have documented something without really understanding what it means. Like, some people will write, do not resuscitate, but what they actually mean is that they would not want to be, a quote, vegetable on long-term prolonged life support. But if there was a chance to have a meaningful recovery or like a temporary trial of life support, they would want that. And so they're like, oh, I didn't realize that's what that meant, that if you found me down with an arrhythmia or something, that you actually wouldn't do anything. I just wouldn't want to be, in a prolonged vegetative state. So just practically speaking, I still clarify if people like really meant what they wrote. And then from a sort of emotional standpoint, I also clarify because I view death as a series of conversations. I don't think it's like, oh, you filled out this advance directive back in 2021. We're good. like we're good on death and dying, don't need to address that anymore. Like it's a series of conversations, and I find that when I introduce it that way, like, hey, I'm just gonna ask about the D word. I know you've just been diagnosed, or you're even still in the diagnostic process. Like, we are still at the point where we think you might have cancer, but we're not 100% sure. But I find it really helpful to understand like attitudes about death and dying and end of life. Is it okay to go there? And so, a lot of people are surprised and a little bit scared with that. But a lot of people aren't. They're like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for asking that. Like, death is the elephant in the room, especially for young people. I think that it's very, it's almost taboo to bring up with a young person who's diagnosed, because the undercurrent of emotions is like, of course, we're going to do everything and we're going to try everything, and that somehow those things are mutually exclusive. Like, the current paradigm is that medicine is this assembly line, and we only talk about the death and dying part when we feel like you're toward that part of the conveyor belt. And I am on a mission to tear down that paradigm. I think that when you acknowledge death and you ask about death and attitudes about end of life, that you can actually help people be more free to live their life and to embrace their vitality, and to kind of figure out what that means to them. So I bring it up, and sometimes it's really touchy the first time, but we'll talk about it at subsequent visits, or we'll talk about it as things change clinically. If there's been like a new development, whether it's a positive development or an unexpectedly, kind of a setback in treatment. So yeah, I bring it up, and I find that it's really freeing for people in general.
Can I go back to something from a couple of minutes ago?
Sure.
I think when you were talking about your personal experience with treatment,
Mhm.
you briefly mentioned a point in the experience where you ended up having, I forgot the words you used, but like a subliminal experience.
Oh yeah, like I would describe it as a near-death experience. I've actually become really interested in near-death experiences since then, and how they're across cultures and languages, they're very similarly described. And I find that interesting. Um,
Can you talk about that and how that influences the conversation that you're having with patients around advanced directives and goals of care?
yeah. I think that, I don't know, so when my cell counts were really low, and I felt this like detachment from my body, and um and I became really sort of preoccupied with this vision of light shining through the trees, like when there's a forest of trees and the beams of light are coming through the trees. And I drew it in the hospital, and I painted it, and actually learned, excuse my dog, I'm so sorry. I
Your house
actually
is vital, don't worry.
It is. I learned that there's a word for that vision in Japanese. It's called komorebi, the light shining through the trees. And I became so fixated with that visual, because not only was I seeing that, but I felt I was becoming that. So I felt I was becoming the beam of light shining through the trees. And like it felt like an energetic dispersion, so that I was being kind of released from this vessel, but I still had an awareness or a consciousness. I just felt that I was becoming part of like a bigger energy and a bigger consciousness. So it felt like sort of emerging with the everythingness. Um, that means different things to different people, and it was a very like real energetic experience for me. Like, it felt that that thing really happened, because then when it was over, I felt like I kind of climbed my way back into this broken body, and had this choice, like I really wanted to stay here. um
Hmm.
and yeah, it was really hard to talk about. I didn't have words for that experience for months. And at first it was really focused on the grief aspect of it, like how close it felt like I got to the end of my life.
Mm.
And yet after that, it felt like, wow, what a gift to feel like I saw kind of beneath the veil of things.
Mm.
And um and I do feel that I'm carrying like a different energy than I did before all of this happened. That whatever happened to me there in that everythingness, that a little bit of that has stayed with me since that near death experience. And I think that does shape some of the conversations that I have with people. And how it shapes it is that I think that I'm able to talk about death in a way that, um, like I try to meet people where they're at, and sometimes it is very sad, but sometimes it's weirdly funny, you know?
Yes.
My medical assistant, like my program coordinator, she said that one of the most surprising things to her about our practice is that she'll walk by the exam room and she's really surprised at how often there is somebody in my room with very advanced illness, and she's hearing laughter from the room and like not computing, like what are they laughing about in there? Um, and I think that that's one of the things, just sort of being able to meet people if they find it funny or if they have a dark sense of humor, just being able to mirror that back to them, and allow them to have their own narrative instead of like the medical system's narrative on them. And so, yeah, it's really, and also just this idea that healing and curing are not the same. So, and I think that's a really important thing that I have seen people who are completely cured or no evidence of disease in their cancer, and yet they are not healed at all. They feel still very soul sick or like major PTSD from treatment. And then conversely, um, I have seen people who have very advanced cancer and are close to the end of life, and they have said to me that they feel healed, like on their deathbed in the last day of life. They feel like something in them has been healed, and they're not afraid anymore. And so I just think those conversations, when you allow people to narrate their own experience like that, it's super powerful and also very powerful for families.
Oh, you and I can talk for hours.
Yeah.
There was something that you just said that I think is worth us unpacking, which is when you let someone tell you their narrative, it's different than the medical system's narrative.
Mhm.
So that's one thread. And then we were also going to discuss the paper that you read,
Yeah.
the patient-centered outcomes research paper. And there was something that you said before we started recording, which was you've been thinking about this all week and the idea of patient-centeredness as a concept
Hmm.
and the way that's landing for you, given the multiple hats you've worn. So
Yeah.
medical narrative, patient-centeredness, given your experiences on three sides.
Yeah.
Um, that's the theme I'd love to unpack with you.
I would say the medical narrative, I try to elicit patient narratives all during the experience, and some people will just say, I have no idea what you're talking about. And that's cool too. That in and of itself is a narrative. Like they're like, I'm just here because my mammogram says that there's breast cancer and I'm just gonna do all the things. And that's cool too. Like we could totally do that. But some people, you ask that, like I just say, do you have any underlying beliefs about your cancer? Um, and it's really amazing how many people say yes.